Suga's interview was violently interrupted by Jungkook. What unfolded left fans speechless, revealing secrets and emotions no one expected. Suga was interrupted by Jungkook during interview. What happened next shocked fans' broken heart. The microphone crackled just as Suga leaned in, his fingers tapping lightly against the polished glass table, the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the sterile studio air. "I've always wondered," he began, voice steady but low, a slight tremor betraying his calm exterior, "if people ever really see the truth behind the music." His gaze was fixed on the interviewer, but behind the lens a shadow flickered across the camera, a movement sudden and unsettling. Before he could continue, the studio door slammed open. Jungkook stormed in, eyes wide with urgency, breath sharp and uneven, a rolled-up piece of paper clutched in his fist. "Min Yoongi," he shouted, voice breaking the controlled atmosphere, "you can't say that, not here." The room froze, crew members exchanged nervous glances. Suga's brow furrowed, lips parting slightly, a mix of surprise and annoyance flashing across his face. His hand hovered midair as if unsure whether to push the microphone away or confront the intrusion directly. Jungkook's presence was electrifying, almost dangerous. There was an edge to him now that no fan had ever witnessed, an unspoken tension that screamed of secrets, betrayals, and truths on the brink of exposure. "You don't understand what it means if you say that now," Jungkook continued, stepping closer, eyes blazing with something between fear and desperation. Suga's heartbeat quickened, not from fear but from recognition. He knew that tone. He had seen it in Jungkook during long nights of practice, during moments when the weight of expectation nearly crushed him. There was a message behind Jungkook's interruption, a warning wrapped in raw emotion. The interviewer coughed nervously, trying to regain control, but the air had shifted, the tension was palpable. Suga exhaled slowly, letting his gaze meet Jungkook. "Explain yourself," he said quietly, voice steady but laced with challenge. "Now." Jungkook hesitated, the paper trembling in his grip. Sweat slicked his forehead and the faintest quiver ran through his jaw. "It's about the truth, Yoongi," he said finally, voice almost a whisper. "Everything you're about to say, it's not just words, people will hurt. They'll—" He stopped, swallowed hard, and the raw weight of unspoken consequences hung in the air. Suga leaned back slightly, observing him carefully. Memories flitted across his mind, long nights filled with unspoken tension, promises broken in silence, moments of betrayal neither wanted to acknowledge. He sensed that what Jungkook held was more than a warning, it was a confession, a plea, and a threat all at once. The studio lights reflected off the polished floor, casting elongated shadows across Suga's thoughtful face. He reached slowly for the paper in Jungkook's hands, never breaking eye contact. The texture was rough, the edges slightly torn. As his fingers brushed the paper, a rush of cold realization surged through him. The contents were explosive, capable of shaking everything he had built, everything Jungkook had fought to protect. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the distant hum of equipment filled the void, punctuated by the shallow, uneven breaths of two men who carried too many secrets between them. Suga finally broke the silence, his voice calm yet charged with intensity. "You've brought me this now, not by chance. Tell me everything." Jungkook nodded, and the weight of confession spilled into the room, raw and unfiltered, exposing vulnerabilities neither had dared show in public. The cameras continued to roll, capturing a moment that fans would later dissect endlessly, a raw collision of emotion, loyalty, and fear. As Jungkook spoke, Suga felt something shift inside him. The layers of performance, the armor built over years, began to crack. He understood the stakes, the danger, and the fragile truth that could either destroy them or redefine everything. And in that charged silence, punctuated by whispered revelations, the world outside the studio ceased to exist. The interview had transformed. What was meant to be polished, rehearsed, and composed became an unfiltered descent into truth, exposing the complexity of trust, ambition, and love between two people bound by history and shared secrets. When it ended, the room was quiet. Fans watching from screens across the globe would later describe it as a revelation, a shockwave of emotion that no statement, no social media post could ever replicate. Suga's eyes met Jungkook's one last time before the cameras cut, the unspoken understanding between them stronger than any words could convey. And yet, despite the relief of confession, a lingering tension remained. Questions of loyalty, morality, and hidden intentions simmered beneath the surface, promising that this encounter was only the beginning of a story far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The hum of the studio lingered like a low, vibrating pulse, echoing off the walls as if the very air were holding its breath. Suga sat motionless, the paper still warm beneath his fingers, feeling the weight of Jungkook's urgency pressing against him. There was no turning back. The room had become a crucible, every sound amplified, every heartbeat palpable. Jungkook's chest heaved as he tried to regain control of his nerves. "It's not just what people will think," he said, voice lower now, almost pleading. "It's about who they'll blame and who will pay for it. Yoongi, you can't do this alone." Suga's gaze softened slightly, but the steel behind his eyes never wavered. He had seen Jungkook like this before, a tempest of loyalty, fear, and reckless courage. Yet now it felt different, the stakes were higher. "And what exactly do you want me to do, Jungkook? Walk away, pretend I never wrote the lyrics, sit silently while the storm swallows everyone?" His tone was even, but the air between them crackled with tension. Jungkook swallowed hard, the edge of desperation sharpening. "I don't want silence, I don't want hiding, but this has to be handled carefully. One wrong word and," he trailed off, glancing toward the recording equipment. The thought of their private turmoil being exposed terrified him. The faint click of a camera adjusting focus made the danger feel immediate, like the world was waiting for them to falter. Suga exhaled slowly, the corner of his lips twitching as though he were suppressing a laugh or a curse. "You always think you can protect everyone, huh?" His voice carried the weight of memory, recalling late nights in the studio, the arguments, the quiet confessions behind closed doors. "But sometimes, Jungkook, you can't shield people from the truth. You can only decide how you face it." The words hung between them, heavy and almost tangible. Jungkook's hands clenched and unclenched, nails pressing into his palms as he wrestled with the storm of emotions swirling inside him. Suga's presence was unwavering, magnetic in its calm, but the undercurrent of tension was undeniable, two forces colliding, neither willing to yield, yet bound by something deeper than fear. Then, almost imperceptibly, Suga's expression shifted. A flicker of recognition passed through his eyes, a memory, a guilt, a connection Jungkook had never seen before. "You came here for a reason," he said quietly, voice raw with barely contained emotion. "It's not just to stop me from speaking. You want something from me." Jungkook nodded, the truth of it almost unbearable. "I want us to be honest, really honest. No more half-truths, no more walls." His words trembled, but there was a clarity in them, a courage forged in fear. "If we do this, if we go all the way, there's no turning back. But if we do," his voice cracked, almost breaking entirely, and Suga realized he had never seen Jungkook this vulnerable, this raw. For a long moment, silence dominated, the only sound the faint ticking of a clock in the corner. Suga finally leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, eyes never leaving Jungkook's. "Then we do it carefully," he said, voice measured but with an unspoken intensity. "But we do it together, every step, every word together." Relief and fear battled within Jungkook, the tight knot in his chest loosening only slightly. The paper in Suga's hand felt lighter now, less a weapon and more a key, an opportunity to finally confront the shadows that had haunted them both. Outside the studio, cameras continued to roll, oblivious to the quiet war waging within these walls. Every flicker of emotion, every micro-expression would later ignite debates and theories among fans, but at that moment, neither Suga nor Jungkook cared. They were alone in a space that demanded honesty, courage, and trust, three things harder to maintain than any performance they had ever delivered. Suga finally placed the paper on the table between them, letting it lie there like a bridge. "Whatever happens," he said, voice low but unwavering, "we own it. No regrets, no lies, just the truth." Jungkook's lips pressed into a firm line, nodding, "I'm ready." The tension didn't vanish, it transformed. From a storm about to explode, it became a current, a river pulling them toward a truth that neither could deny. And as the studio lights cast long shadows across their faces, Suga realized that the interruption was not an obstacle, it was the catalyst. For the first time in years, the air felt electric with possibility, fear, and raw, unfiltered reality. The studio had gone quiet, but the weight of unspoken truths pressed down on Suga and Jungkook like a physical force. Every breath felt deliberate, heavy with consequence. The faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant clicks of cameras seemed amplified, as if the room itself was listening, waiting for the next move. Jungkook's eyes darted to the paper lying between them. The words written on it were more than notes, they were a roadmap of secrets, confessions, and promises broken long ago. He swallowed hard, the taste of tension metallic on his tongue. "Do you really mean it?" he asked, voice low, almost vulnerable. "That we face this together?" Suga's gaze never wavered. There was a weight in his stare, the kind that came from years of carefully measured decisions, moments of failure, and quiet victories no one ever acknowledged. "I do," he said, his voice soft but unwavering, "but that doesn't mean it will be easy. The moment this goes public, everything changes, not just for us, for everyone connected to this. Jungkook's shoulders tensed, and for a moment the youthful bravado he often displayed dissolved into something raw, something fragile. He had always been the one to rush forward to shield others from truth, but now he felt the enormity of what they were about to unleash. "I know," he whispered, "and I'm ready to deal with it, whatever comes." The words hung in the air like smoke. Suga leaned back slightly, running a hand over his temple, his mind racing. Memories of past interviews, past moments of deception, and the quiet loneliness behind the public persona surged forward. He realized that the interruption, though shocking, had opened a door, one that could never be closed again. "You realize," Suga said finally, his tone sharper now, "that once this is out, there's no turning back. People will judge, people will attack, and they'll try to use this against us." His eyes bore into Jungkook's. "Do you still want to do this?" Jungkook's expression hardened, determination flashing beneath the tension. "I don't care about the attacks," he said firmly. "I care about truth, I care about us, not the perception, not the rumors, just the reality." Suga exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and unease washing over him. He had always been the one to weigh risks, to predict consequences, but Jungkook's conviction was undeniable. There was a fire in him now, one that mirrored the fire Suga had felt in his own heart years ago, uncompromising, relentless, impossible to ignore. The interviewer, sensing the intensity of the moment, tried to steer back to routine questions, but the room had transformed. The cameras captured something more profound than any scripted response: two men confronting the chaos of truth, trust, and unspoken emotions. Every glance, every micro-expression was a testament to vulnerability and courage. Suga's fingers brushed the paper again, tracing the edge, feeling the weight of their decision. "Then we set the terms," he said quietly. "We control the narrative, we reveal what needs to be revealed on our terms, not theirs." Jungkook nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips despite the tension. There was an unspoken understanding forming between them, a pact born not out of convenience but out of necessity, trust, and the raw honesty that had long eluded both. And yet, even as they forged that fragile alliance, the shadows outside the studio loomed. Industry pressures, fan expectations, and the ever-watchful eye of the media waited patiently, ready to pounce at the slightest misstep. The truth they were about to unleash would ripple outward, sparking reactions they could neither predict nor control. Suga leaned forward, resting an elbow on the table, eyes meeting Jungkook's once more. "We do this together," he said, voice calm but resolute. "Every step, every consequence, no secrets." For Jungkook, the moment was both terrifying and exhilarating. The storm that had interrupted their lives, the storm they had long feared, had arrived. And for the first time, they weren't running from it, they were standing in the eye of it, ready to face everything. The paper lay between them, silent yet powerful, a symbol of the truth they were about to claim, and the world outside continued unaware, oblivious to the seismic shift taking place in the studio. Every second that ticked by was charged with possibility, danger, and the undeniable pull of fate. In that suspended, electric silence, they realized one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. The moment Suga and Jungkook stepped out of the studio, the world hit them like a tidal wave. The bright lights of the hallway reflected harshly off the polished floors, and the distant hum of the ventilation system sounded almost deafening in contrast to the stillness they had left behind. Every step echoed, a reminder that nothing in that room could stay contained. The truth they had decided to face together had already begun to radiate outward, invisible yet undeniable. Jungkook's fists were clenched at his sides, knuckles white under the pressure. "Do you think anyone's ready for this?" he asked, voice low, trembling with anticipation and fear. The question wasn't just about fans or the media, it was about the unseen consequences, the people whose lives would collide with their revelations in ways they could not control. Suga adjusted the strap of his bag over his shoulder, his expression unreadable, the weight of the earlier conversation still pressing against his chest. "It doesn't matter if they're ready," he replied quietly, eyes fixed ahead. "We're not doing this for them, we're doing it because it's the only way to stop the lies from eating us alive." A flash of movement caught Jungkook's eye, a crew member, phone in hand, hesitating as if torn between duty and curiosity. Suga's gaze followed his, sharp and commanding. "Step back," he said, and the tension in his voice carried an authority that silenced hesitation instantly. The man stepped aside, muttering under his breath as if acknowledging that some truths were too heavy to witness unprepared. They moved into the elevator, the metal walls amplifying their quiet breathing. Jungkook leaned against the panel, shoulders slumping slightly. I thought once we talked it out in there it would feel lighter, he admitted, voice barely audible over the soft whir of the elevator. But it feels heavier. Suga turned, his eyes catching the dim light, and for the first time in hours, Jungkook saw vulnerability etched across his usually impenetrable features. Truth is heavy, Suga said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. And sometimes it's heavier when you're the one carrying it alone. That's why you're here, that's why we're doing this together. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open, spilling them into a corridor filled with muted conversations, footsteps, and the faint clatter of equipment. Fans waiting outside the building had already begun to speculate. Their phones were pointed toward the studio windows, flashes punctuating the air like small fireworks, capturing moments none of them could yet understand. Jungkook's stomach tightened. They'll see it, they'll see everything, he whispered almost to himself. Are we ready for that? Suga didn't answer immediately. His hand hovered briefly over the door handle to a waiting car, the metal cold and grounding beneath his fingers. Finally, he said, we'll never be ready, but courage isn't about being ready, it's about standing up when you can't afford to hide anymore. A sudden gust of wind rattled the glass doors as they stepped outside. The night smelled faintly of rain and asphalt, sharp and vivid against the faint perfume of the city. The world felt larger now, unforgiving, waiting for the ripple they had unleashed to crash. Yet in that moment, neither of them flinched. The storm was coming, yes, but together they could face it. Jungkook glanced at Suga and their eyes met. There was a silent acknowledgement, a bond reaffirmed in the tension and gravity of the moment. Together, Jungkook said, voice firmer now. Suga nodded, letting a rare, faint smile touch his lips. Together, he echoed. The car doors closed behind them with a definitive click, and as the engine roared to life, carrying them toward the unknown, the city lights blurred past, a chaotic, beautiful prelude to the storm that awaited. Every shadow they passed hinted at challenges, betrayals, and unexpected confrontations, but for the first time the weight of truth felt less like a curse and more like a weapon they could wield. Inside the car, silence settled again, but it was no longer heavy with tension. It was quiet with anticipation, with the knowledge that once they moved forward, nothing would ever be the same. And somewhere deep beneath the fear, a spark of exhilaration pulsed, a realization that facing the world honestly together might finally set them free. The morning after the interview, Suga woke to the relentless buzz of his phone. Notifications flooded the screen like an avalanche, messages, emails, fan posts, news alerts, all reacting to what had transpired just hours before. Even in the quiet of his apartment, the weight of exposure pressed down on him. Every glance at the screen seemed to confirm a truth he already knew: nothing would ever be private again. Jungkook was already there, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside a coffee table strewn with half-drunk cups and crumpled notes. His eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, were fixed on the scrolling feed. It's worse than I imagined, he murmured. The rumors, the edits, the comments, some are celebrating, some are attacking, but no one is seeing the real story. Suga sighed, rubbing his temples. The tension in his jaw was so tight it hurt to move his face. I know, he said quietly, and it's only going to get worse. The truth doesn't land gently in people's hands, it hits like a hammer. Jungkook looked up, eyes sharp despite the fatigue. Then we control it, he said firmly, the conviction in his voice a stark contrast to the weariness on his face. We show them the real truth, not what they think it is. Suga paused, considering. It was tempting to retreat, to let the media and fans twist the narrative on their own, to protect themselves by staying silent. But the fire in Jungkook's eyes reminded him why they had taken the risk in the first place. All right, Suga said slowly. But it has to be precise, no room for misinterpretation. One slip and it'll all blow up in our faces. The hours that followed were a blur of strategy and preparation. Statements were drafted and redrafted, meetings were held with the team, and every word, every pause was meticulously planned. The city outside continued its relentless rhythm, oblivious to the storm building in Suga and Jungkook's lives. By evening, the first responses began to surface. Fans dissected every micro-expression from the interview, rumors spread like wildfire, and social media threads erupted into heated debates. Some accused Suga of betrayal, some praised Jungkook for his courage, and some whispered about secrets no one outside the room had witnessed. Jungkook scrolled through the feeds with a detached intensity, lips pressed into a thin line. They're missing the point, he said softly. The real story isn't out there yet. They're reacting to fragments, pieces, shadows of what actually happened. Suga's fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the table. Then we give them the full picture, he said, but carefully, step by step, we can't let anyone weaponize this against us or against each other. Jungkook nodded, and for a brief moment the air between them carried a rare sense of clarity. Amid the chaos, the fear, and the uncertainty, they were aligned. They understood the stakes, the risks, and the potential fallout, but they also understood the necessity of honesty, the power of truth shared on their terms. The night deepened and the apartment grew quieter. Only the hum of the city below and the occasional notification from a phone punctuated the stillness. Suga leaned back in his chair, eyes shadowed with thought. "This is just the beginning," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Once we step fully into this, there's no going back. Everything changes. Friends, fans, enemies, nothing remains the same." Jungkook's gaze met his, unwavering. "I know," he said, "and I'm not afraid, not anymore." Suga allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible nod. Despite the chaos, the fear, and the scrutiny waiting outside their walls, there was a strange, grounding sense of purpose. They weren't just surviving, they were claiming agency over their story, over the truth they had long been forced to hide. And somewhere deep within the storm of notifications, headlines, and opinions, a quiet determination took root. This confrontation, this disruption, was not a threat, it was an awakening. For Suga, for Jungkook, and for everyone who would witness the aftermath, nothing would ever be the same again. The night stretched on, and though exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them, a flicker of anticipation lingered. The storm outside might rage, but they had chosen to face it head-on together. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The next morning arrived with a brutal clarity. Sunlight streamed through the half-drawn blinds, cutting sharp lines across the floor and illuminating the tension etched into both Suga's and Jungkook's faces. The city beyond the apartment window thrummed with indifference, unaware that two lives had shifted irreversibly overnight. Suga's phone rang incessantly. Agents, journalists, even acquaintances who rarely reached out suddenly needed something urgent. Each call, each message felt like a reminder that once the truth started moving, it refused to be contained. He answered one, a muted sigh escaping before he could stop it. "Yoongi," a voice hissed on the other line, familiar but loaded with authority. "What did you just do?" We had to," Suga replied evenly, choosing his words carefully though his jaw clenched with frustration. "It was the only way to stop the misinformation from spreading further. We can't pretend anymore." There was a pause and then a warning, sharp and unflinching. "Careful, this is bigger than you realize. Once the industry gets wind of this, people will move. Not everyone will move in your favor." Suga hung up, exhaling slowly. Jungkook watched him, the silent understanding passing between them. The storm was growing stronger and their lives were now tangled in a web they could neither control nor fully see. "I told you it wouldn't be simple," Jungkook said quietly, running a hand through his hair. "Once the truth leaves our lips, it never goes back in." Suga's eyes, usually calm and composed, darkened with thought. "I know, but it's not just about us anymore. It's about those who would exploit silence and those who would exploit exposure." The apartment door buzzed unexpectedly. Both tensed, exchanging a glance that carried unspoken questions. When Suga opened it, a figure waited, someone neither of them had expected. An industry executive with a carefully neutral expression, lips pressed in a line that revealed nothing. "Yoongi, Jungkook," the figure said, voice measured but carrying weight. "I'll be frank, what happened yesterday, it's made waves, and not all of them good. You need guidance or at least containment before this spirals entirely out of control." Jungkook stepped forward instinctively, tension radiating from his posture. "We don't need containment, we need clarity, we need the truth to be heard as it is." The executive's eyes flicked between them, sharp and calculating. "And do you really think the world will accept it that way? Fans, media, competitors, they won't see nuance. They'll see a story to exploit. You need allies, or enemies will be made before you even take a breath." Suga nodded slowly, his mind racing. "Then we choose allies carefully," he said, "and we face enemies openly, but we don't hide, not this time." The room was thick with unspoken tension. Every glance, every subtle movement spoke volumes. Alliances were fragile, trust even more so, and every decision carried a weight that could tip the balance between survival and catastrophe. After the executive left, Jungkook turned to Suga, voice barely above a whisper. Do you feel it? How fast it's moving? It's like we're standing in a river that won't let us step out. Suga's eyes narrowed, focusing on the skyline beyond the window. I feel it, but sometimes you have to let the river carry you, you just need to make sure you're paddling in the right direction. Jungkook exhaled slowly, tension ebbing just slightly. Then we paddle together, he said. No turning back, no compromises. Suga allowed a rare fleeting smile. Together, he agreed. But as the day unfolded, the storm outside the apartment only intensified. Social media threads spiraled out of control, news outlets speculated wildly. And unexpected figures from both the industry and personal circles began circling, their intentions obscured but their interest unmistakable. By nightfall, Suga and Jungkook sat in the apartment once more, exhaustion weighing heavy, yet a strange clarity settled over them. The storm was no longer a threat to avoid, it was a force to navigate, and they were ready to confront it head-on. Every shadow hiding in the corners of their lives, every whisper from the world beyond the walls, carried the same truth. The disruption was only the beginning, and survival meant understanding not just the danger outside, but the vulnerabilities within themselves. And somewhere deep in the tension, beneath the fear, a quiet determination pulsed. Whatever came next, they would face it not as isolated individuals, but as two forces bound by truth, loyalty, and unspoken understanding. The morning air felt sharper than usual, as if the city itself had grown colder overnight. Suga stood at the window, hands resting lightly on the glass, watching the skyline blur beneath the soft drizzle. The news had spread further than they could have imagined, and the reactions were no longer just whispers, they were attacks. Headlines spun fragments of yesterday's interview into threads of speculation, some cruel, some falsely flattering, all dangerously distorted. Jungkook paced the room, the edges of his jacket creased from restless hands. They're twisting everything, he said, voice taut with frustration. Every word, every pause, they're making it mean something it never did. Suga didn't turn from the window. People always will, you can't control perception. Only the truth you carry in here, he said, tapping lightly against his temple, can guide you through it. Their phones buzzed incessantly, messages from fans, threats from trolls, comments from journalists digging for angles. One notification in particular made Jungkook freeze, an anonymous message warning them to stop now or face consequences you won't survive. The air thickened with tension, the room suddenly smaller, suffocating. Suga finally turned, his expression hard, jaw set. So this is it, the first wave, he murmured. The first taste of how far people will go when they feel the truth threatens them. Jungkook swallowed hard. Do we fight it or retreat? His question lingered in the air, heavy with uncertainty. Suga's eyes narrowed. Neither. We respond on our terms, we stay visible, but we control the narrative. We don't bend, we don't hide. That's the only way we survive this without losing ourselves. A sharp knock at the door made both of them jump. Suga moved toward it cautiously. Behind the door was a courier, an envelope slipped through the slot. The handwriting was unfamiliar, angular, and deliberate. Suga picked it up, feeling the weight of whatever it contained, a cold shiver running down his spine. He tore it open carefully. Inside was a single page, stark in its simplicity, yet its contents were chilling, threats veiled as warnings, insinuations about past actions, and implications that someone close to them might be manipulated. The message was clear: someone had been watching, waiting, and planning. Jungkook's hands trembled as he read over Suga's shoulder. They know more than we thought, he muttered, voice barely audible. The adrenaline in his veins spiked, the earlier resolve now mingling with fear. Suga's fingers tightened around the paper. Then we prepare, he said calmly, though the cold calculation in his eyes betrayed the storm within. We anticipate moves, counter moves, and we don't give them the satisfaction of panic. If they want a reaction, we make it strategic. If they want chaos, we give them control of nothing. Jungkook exhaled slowly, tension coiling into determination. Together, he said, voice firm despite the fear. Suga's nod was almost imperceptible but absolute. Together, he echoed. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows, echoing the rhythm of the chaos outside and the rising storm within. For a fleeting moment, both men allowed themselves to feel the weight of reality, the danger, the scrutiny, the inevitability of exposure. Yet beneath it all, a hardened determination took root. They were no longer just two men reacting to an interrupted interview. They were strategists, allies, and guardians of a truth too powerful to be silenced. And as the day unfolded with threats and scrutiny pressing from every angle, they understood something fundamental. Survival would not be about hiding or running. It would be about standing firm, facing the storm head-on, and using every ounce of strength, intellect, and trust between them to navigate the chaos. Outside, the city moved obliviously, lights flickering like distant stars. Inside, Suga and Jungkook prepared for a war that no one else fully understood, a battle fought not with fists but with strategy, truth, and an unwavering bond forged in the eye of an unexpected storm. The day began with a tension so thick it felt almost tangible, hanging in the air like smoke. Suga sat at the edge of his bed, phone in hand, scrolling through a flood of messages that had shifted overnight from passive comments to carefully calculated manipulations. Each notification felt like a probe, a test of their limits. Jungkook entered quietly, closing the door behind him. "There's someone waiting for us," he said, voice low but firm. "Not media, not fans, someone who actually wants to help you or at least claims to." Suga's brow furrowed. Help can be a trap. Jungkook nodded, tension coiling in his shoulders. "I know, but at this point, we can't face this alone. We need someone who understands the battlefield we're in, someone who can move in the shadows while we hold the front line." By mid-morning, they met the mysterious figure in a dimly lit cafe, the hum of conversation masking the gravity of the encounter. The man was calm, precise, his presence carrying authority and secrecy in equal measure. He introduced himself simply as Hwan, a strategist known for operating behind the scenes in high-stakes situations, the kind where public image and private truth collide. "You two have made waves," Hwan began, his tone even but sharp. "But waves attract sharks. You've stirred attention and not all of it is friendly. You need guidance, methods, allies, and preemptive measures, otherwise your truths will be twisted into weapons against you." Suga leaned back, studying him, weighing trust against caution. "And why help us?" he asked. "What's in it for you?" Hwan's eyes glimmered with a knowing calm. "Let's just say the chaos benefits no one if it's uncontrolled. I'm here because I can't stand watching precision unravel into ruin." Jungkook exhaled, a flicker of relief passing over his features. "Then we need to act fast," he said. "Every day that passes, the threads tighten. Every rumor, every misinterpretation gives them leverage." Hwan nodded. "Exactly, and leverage is dangerous when you're in the public eye, so we'll build a strategy, who to confront, who to align with, and which battles are worth fighting. Some enemies are best left unaware, others must be neutralized before they act." Suga's eyes softened slightly, rare vulnerability peeking through his composed exterior. "I hate that we're forced into this," he admitted. "I hate that truth feels like a weapon." Jungkook's hand brushed briefly against Suga as they both sat in silence. "Truth only becomes dangerous when it's misused," he said. "We just have to be the ones wielding it." As they left the cafe, a shadow lingered in the doorway, unnoticed by both. A figure with intent in every step, watching, calculating. The storm had grown beyond the two of them now, and allies and adversaries alike were converging. By evening, Suga and Jungkook returned to the apartment to find a new message waiting, encrypted, direct, and unmistakably threatening. Someone close to them was being manipulated as leverage, a silent warning that the battlefield extended into personal spaces. Jungkook's voice was tight with restrained fury. "They're playing with the people we care about now." Suga exhaled, steadying himself. "Then the fight becomes personal, and personal fights require precision, strategy, and no hesitation." The night deepened, the city outside indifferent to the tensions inside. But inside, Suga and Jungkook were no longer just reacting. They were planning, anticipating, and forging bonds stronger than fear. Allies like Hwan offered guidance, but the stakes were clearer than ever. The storm had grown, shadows had multiplied, and survival meant not only facing the chaos outside but confronting the vulnerabilities within themselves. In that quiet intensity, a new determination took hold. They would not be victims, they would not be silenced, they would navigate the storm together. And emerge with the truth intact, even if it meant standing in the center of a world ready to tear them apart. The city lights outside flickered like distant warnings as Suga and Jungkook stepped out of the apartment, the weight of anticipation pressing down heavier than ever. Hwan had warned them, some moves were unavoidable, some enemies too bold to ignore. Tonight, the storm would test them in ways no social media backlash ever could. They arrived at the secluded location, a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with damp concrete and the faint tang of metal, the kind of place where intentions were as opaque as shadows. Hwan led the way, a silent shadow of precision, while Jungkook's senses remained sharp, every nerve alive to the slightest movement. Suga's hand hovered over his jacket pocket almost subconsciously as he scanned the area. "This feels like a trap," he muttered quietly. "It probably is," Jungkook replied, voice calm but edged with steel. "But we know the rules now, eyes open, every step calculated, we're not walking blind anymore." They moved deeper into the warehouse where figures emerged from corners, the low hum of conversation shifting into tense silence as they noticed the newcomers. One of them, a sharply dressed man with a reputation for exploiting public scandals, stepped forward. His eyes glinted with predatory intent. "You two have been making quite a mess," he said smoothly, every word coated with menace. "The world loves a spectacle, but don't think you can control it forever. Eventually, the tide turns." Suga's gaze was icy. "And when it does, we'll be ready. We're not here to beg for approval, we're here to set the record straight." The man laughed softly, a sound that carried venom. "Bold words, let's see if you can back them up when the consequences start landing." Jungkook stepped closer to Suga, placing a protective hand near his shoulder, not touching but signaling readiness. "We won't be bullied," he said. "Not by you, not by anyone." A tense silence fell. Every second stretched, the air crackling with anticipation and latent danger. Suga could feel the pressure building inside him, a controlled storm of adrenaline and strategy. The world outside was watching, but here, in the shadows, every decision carried immediate consequences. Suddenly, one of the figures made a sudden movement, a reach for a concealed object. Suga's reflexes kicked in. He stepped forward, blocking the motion with precision, a sharp command on his lips. Jungkook mirrored him instantly, creating a barrier of presence and intent that forced the aggressor to hesitate. "You underestimate us," Suga said quietly, voice low but commanding, "and that's your first mistake." Hwan's presence behind them was subtle but crucial, a shadow providing cover, signaling escape routes, and ensuring that Suga and Jungkook maintained control of the confrontation. The aggressor froze, realizing the meticulous coordination they faced. "You think this ends here?" the man spat, tension and frustration coiling through his words. "You're stirring forces you don't understand." Suga's eyes didn't waver. "We understand enough to face them together." Jungkook's gaze hardened. "We've been pushed into the storm before. We'll stand in it, not run. Try again and you'll see what that means." The warehouse seemed to contract around them, shadows stretching long and ominous. Yet in that claustrophobic space, Suga and Jungkook exuded a quiet, unyielding power. Every move, every breath, every decision was precise. The confrontation wasn't violent, it was psychological, strategic, a duel of wills played out in silence, tension, and controlled energy. Finally, the aggressors withdrew, realizing that the balance had shifted. The message was clear: Suga and Jungkook were no longer reactive. They were a force, capable of defending the truth, controlling perception, and standing against threats that dared approach. As they stepped back into the night air, rain lightly falling, Jungkook exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders in a controlled release. "That could have gone worse," he admitted. Suga allowed a small, tight smile. "It could have gone better too, but we survived, and survival in this storm means more than any victory in public perception." The city hummed around them, indifferent yet full of potential chaos. But inside, a bond forged in trust, strategy, and courage pulsed stronger than fear. Whatever the world threw at them next, they were ready, not just as allies, but as a unit, an unbreakable front in the face of escalating threats. Tonight had been the first true test. And for the first time, Suga realized that the storm outside was no longer something to fear. It was something they could navigate together with clarity, precision, and unflinching resolve. Morning light seeped through the blinds, cutting across the room in sharp, diagonal lines. Suga sat at the edge of the couch, the weight of the previous night still pressing on his shoulders like a physical force. The confrontation in the warehouse had left marks, not visible bruises, but a lingering sense of how precarious everything had become. Jungkook stood by the window, staring at the city below. The world seemed calm, unaware of the battles raging behind closed doors, yet every headline and social media post reminded them of the storm they could no longer ignore. It's already spiraling, he said quietly, voice low. People are connecting dots, making assumptions, some of them are wrong, some of them dangerous. Suga didn't respond immediately. He reached for his phone, scanning notifications that ranged from supportive messages to veiled threats. The sheer volume of attention was overwhelming, yet beneath the panic and noise, patterns emerged. Certain accounts, certain groups were coordinating. The storm was growing, methodical and relentless. We need to anticipate this, Suga finally said, voice calm but precise. The more visible we are, the more angles they'll exploit. Every post, every public appearance, every word they'll scrutinize. We can't afford mistakes. Jungkook turned, eyes sharp and focused. Then we control it, carefully, strategically, every move intentional. Their plan unfolded over the day. Meetings with Hwan refined their strategy, interviews were scheduled and statements drafted with meticulous precision. They spoke in coded language, anticipating the media's potential distortions and carefully steering the narrative. Every word they released became armor, a shield against misinterpretation. Yet the storm wasn't just external. Inside, tensions simmered. Suga found himself replaying moments from the interview, the warehouse confrontation, and the messages from anonymous threats. Every interaction carried weight. He questioned his decisions, doubted his judgment, and yet Jungkook's unwavering presence grounded him. You're overthinking it, Jungkook said at one point, placing a hand on Suga's shoulder. We've survived worse, and we're still together. That counts for more than anything out there. Suga allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. I know, but the consequences, they're becoming personal. Someone we care about could be targeted next. Jungkook's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing. Then we prepare for that too, strategically, no hesitation. Even as they worked, the world outside reacted. Fans debated, critics criticized, and journalists speculated. Every interaction, every opinion became part of a sprawling web they had to navigate carefully. And yet, through the chaos, a strange clarity emerged. They were no longer victims of circumstance. They were architects of their narrative, wielding truth as both sword and shield. As evening fell, the city lights flickered against the rain-soaked streets. Suga and Jungkook stood together at the apartment window, watching the world move on, unaware of the calculated storm contained within four walls. It's only going to get more intense, Suga said softly, almost to himself. Jungkook's voice was steady, resolute. Then we face it together, all of it. Suga nodded, a weight lifting slightly from his chest. The battle was far from over, but the first wave of tests had been met and they had emerged stronger. Fear and uncertainty lingered, but so did trust, strategy, and an unspoken bond forged in the crucible of disruption. Tonight the storm outside was fierce, but inside they were unshakable. The apartment was quieter than usual that morning, but the stillness carried its own kind of tension. Suga sat cross-legged on the floor, a notebook open before him, every word meticulously recorded, plans, contingencies, and notes on the growing storm outside. Every line felt like a lifeline, a way to stay ahead of the chaos, yet it reminded him of how fragile control truly was. Jungkook leaned against the doorway, a cup of coffee warming his hands. Eyes scanning the room as if searching for something unspoken. We're running out of neutral ground, he said softly. The people we thought we could trust, some of them are slipping away, some of them are watching, and some are waiting to strike. Suga's pen paused midline. Then we find new allies, he said. People who understand the stakes and can operate in the shadows. We can't afford hesitation, not now. Their opportunity arrived unexpectedly. A message, encrypted and precise, led them to a nondescript office downtown. There, waiting with a calm and deliberate presence, was Min, a former strategist known for managing crises that blended public perception with personal stakes. Her reputation was legendary not because she sought fame, but because she maneuvered the chaos others feared to touch. I've been watching, Min said simply, eyes meeting theirs with an intensity that left no room for misinterpretation. You're in deeper than you know, and the people surrounding you, some are compromised. You need someone who sees the whole board, not just your corner. Jungkook stepped forward instinctively, voice firm. Why help us? Min's lips curled faintly, almost imperceptibly. Because unchecked chaos serves no one, not the powerful, not the vulnerable, not even you. I help only when the outcome matters more than ego. Suga exchanged a look with Jungkook, a silent acknowledgement that this was an opportunity they could not refuse. We need clarity, Suga said, voice calm but precise. And we need protection, not just from threats we see but threats we don't. Min nodded, producing a thin folder. Inside were dossiers, profiles, connections, potential manipulations, and shadow players who had begun influencing public opinion, social media narratives, and industry perception. Every name, every pattern, every risk was mapped with surgical precision. "The storm isn't random," she explained. "It's engineered, and you've just stepped into the center. Your truth, your integrity, they're being tested, manipulated, and twisted into a weapon against you." Jungkook's jaw tightened, the weight of the revelation sinking in. "So everything, every rumor, every subtle attack, it's not accidental." "Not a single piece," Min said firmly, "and if you underestimate it, it will break you." Suga exhaled slowly, feeling the tension and responsibility converge. "Then we fight strategically," he said, "step by step, move by move, controlling what we can together." Min gave a faint, approving nod. "Exactly, but know this, not everyone you consider an ally is trustworthy. Some will falter, some will betray. The key is identifying them before it's too late." Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the calculated chessboard now in motion. Yet inside, a sense of purpose ignited. Suga, Jungkook, and Min were no longer just reacting, they were planning, anticipating, and taking control of the storm. The pressure was immense, but clarity had never felt so urgent. As they left the office, a light drizzle fell, the cold air sharp against their faces. Every step felt measured, deliberate. Allies could be counted on, threats could be managed, but the personal toll remained. Secrets unearthed in private moments, truths long avoided, and vulnerabilities previously hidden had begun surfacing, demanding attention, resilience, and courage. Jungkook glanced at Suga, voice low but steady. "We're stronger with her, but we need to stay sharp. The game isn't just outside, it's inside too." Suga's gaze hardened, resolve solidifying. "Then we face it all, every secret, every threat, every shadow together." The storm was no longer distant, it was imminent, calculated, and unavoidable. But with allies who could navigate its depths, Suga and Jungkook felt a rare confidence. The battle ahead was no longer just about truth in the public eye, it was about survival, strategy, and the unshakable bond between them, tempered by chaos, courage, and unwavering loyalty.